quick warning, some of today's stories are pretty messed up, and viewer discretion is definitely advised. Also, if you have a story you would like to send my way, just go to astheravendreams.com and click the button to do so. And thank you. I have a really messed up story to tell about when I worked at an office building for a decently funded software startup. I'm not going to name the company, and I'm going to use fake names throughout the story, but I will say that the company was essentially a software and server load testing, or stress testing, firm. We would stress test products and networks for corporations to give them an overall idea of how their systems could stand. It's not important, but it was an interesting job. However, the company no longer exists, and this story is kind of the reason for why. This startup was, as I mentioned, pretty well funded, and the owner, CEO, president, or whatever his title was a guy named Jeremy. Jeremy was wealthy from another startup that he had founded and sold a few years back. He was an incredibly attractive and charismatic young man. He was also smart when it came to business and tech, but he was socially inept. And he would have anxiety just talking on the phone with people. I know that sounds really strange. Charismatic but anxious. It was more like he was charismatic for the camera and the company, but when it came to talking to new people, he would freak out. Because of this, he would oftentimes ask one of us, the technicians, to make calls to clients, or for us to be on conference calls to answer questions. At one point, we all got kind of fed up with him asking us to be front and center on those calls, and I mentioned to him that he should consider hiring a communications person, or someone to just do that job full-time. It did take a bit of convincing, but after a while, us techs actually got him on board with the idea. And one of the other techs, Dylan, actually had a cousin that was into technology and was wanting to get into the field, but wasn't formally educated or trained, like us. Even better, she was currently looking for a job. He offered to bring her in for an interview, and after just one chat, Jeremy said that she was hired. He seemed to be impressed with her enough to give her the job, so I figured things would work out. When she started, things were going pretty well. Amy took her job seriously. She sat with all of us when she wasn't making calls to understand the process for how we did the tests, and she was doing everything she could to become much more knowledgeable about the product and the company. But things pretty quickly got awkward. Jeremy started spending a lot more time with her in his office, and when I say a lot more time, I mean entire work days. The only thing about Jeremy's office was that half of it was glass, and you could see it out back from the smoker's deck. So we all knew very well why he was spending so much time with her. We knew what they were doing. At first, it was one of those things you could laugh at, but after a week or so of this going on, and the talks getting pretty well to the point of, okay, this is getting sort of gross, I decided to talk to him. I ended up calling him and asked if we could chat for a moment. He said sure, and we went over to one of the one-on-one conference rooms. As soon as we sat down and he asked what was up, I pretty much just let him have the truth. I told him that almost the entire office knew what was going on with him and Amy, and he tried to play ignorant, but I told him that we could literally see him from the back of the building. At first, he seemed like he was curious, but I think it clicked that while there were trees in front of his office, it was still a pretty clear shot. After talking with him about it, he apologized and mentioned that their conduct was inappropriate. I agreed, but I told him I didn't really care if him and Amy were a thing. Just that he needed to do it away from the office. He agreed and said that he would take that into consideration. I thought that this was the end of it, really, and that they would take their relationship off company property. Well, I was apparently incorrect with this. Instead of correcting himself, Jeremy had just decided to move his office to that same one-on-one conference room, a room that was half the size of his original office because it didn't have any windows, and the door locked. So things pretty much just kept going as they were, just without us being able to physically see it. Now, I know that none of this is creepy yet, and it's more so just gross, but it's how things fell apart that make this story creepy. We all knew what was going on, and we were all talking about it. But there was one person that didn't know for sure what was going on between Jeremy and Amy, and that was Dylan, her cousin. We never talked about it around him, and he didn't smoke, so he didn't go out onto the back deck. I'm sure that he had his suspicions, but he didn't know for sure, and we didn't really want to have that awkward conversation. He would ask where Amy or Jeremy were when they were in his office, and we would just say that we didn't know. Dylan was a good guy, but he also had a bit of an anger issue. He was the type to get mad and scream at things when something didn't work, or smack his desk and shout whenever he got frustrated. He was smart, but I think he had some mental issues that he really needed to work through, and I'm sure that it was really starting to bother him with what was going on there. Unfortunately, that is where things get messed up. It was about a week or so after Jeremy had moved his office to the small room when we all got into work and noticed that Amy wasn't at her desk, and Dylan also wasn't there. At first I thought that maybe Dylan had called in, or maybe he was sick. Amy was a bit more odd though, as she wasn't at her desk mostly because she and Jeremy weren't typically together that early in the morning. I just shrugged it off and got started with my day. By 10, we were all kind of concerned. No Amy, no Dylan, and no Jeremy, which was definitely odd. 10 a.m. on Mondays was when we had our team huddle, so we all got together and waited for about 15 minutes to see if Jeremy would show up. He didn't, so we just started going on with the meeting, talking about what we were doing that week and such. After we got through the discussions, I got up to get some water, and I looked over at Dylan's desk. I noticed that Dylan's phone was on his desk, just sitting there. I mentioned it to the guys, and one of them rolled over to pick it up. He then commented that the battery was dead. This was really weird, because he wouldn't have left it there over the weekend. That just didn't seem normal. All of this was strange, but none of it was a huge cause for concern until I went over to Jeremy's office to see if he was there, or if he was okay. I knocked on the door and waited for a response, but there was nothing. I knocked again, but a lot harder, and said Jeremy's name, basically giving the two of them time to get decent if they were doing what I thought they were doing. But again, nothing. At this point, I just said screw it, and I opened the door. If I saw something I didn't want to see, that would be my fault. I did see something that I didn't want to see, but it was not the two of them. Instead, I saw Dylan lying on the floor, and by the looks of it, I could tell that he was not alive. I flipped out. I grabbed my phone and ran out to the guys yelling that Dylan was dead and that I was calling the cops. The rest of us all got out of the building while I explained to the dispatcher what I had found. The cops showed up, alongside the paramedics, and they confirmed what I had thought. He was definitely dead, and it definitely looked like murder. Based on what information they gave us while asking us questions, he had been bludgeoned by a metal trophy that was in Jeremy's office. They found the weapon covered in blood sitting next to his body. We reported everything to them. The affair, that Dylan had a temper, that this felt like Jeremy may have killed him. They took all the information, and we were all held for a while they swept the place for any additional evidence. After they were finished, we were escorted back in to gather our personal belongings from our desk and told that we were not to come back, that this was an active crime scene. None of us really knew what to do. We were all now unemployed, our friend was dead, and our boss was now a potential murderer and on the run with his girlfriend. We all kind of just kept in touch with each other for a few weeks after this happened, but none of us had any new information. After about a month or two, I did get a call from a detective that was assigned to the case, and I went in to talk to them about things. I was also shown a picture and asked if it was Jeremy and Amy. It was, and the detective mentioned that this was the last they had seen them. And this picture was taken from a security camera at a bus depot and taken about an hour after when Dylan would have died. Basically, they were on the run, and they'd had about 2 days to get out of town. I really have no idea if they were ever caught, but my guess is that they fled the country. Like I mentioned, Jeremy had a significant amount of money, and he had the means to get out of the country, and I would think that they would have contacted us if they had caught them. I know that this story doesn't have the happy ending that it should, and there hasn't been any justice for Dylan. It's still really hard for me to believe that they killed him, and if I had to speculate, Dylan probably showed up on that Saturday to do some overtime work, and he probably walked in on them in Jeremy's office. This probably led to some kind of fight, and Jeremy ended up murdering Dylan. It's hard for me to believe that he would be capable of doing so, and it's just as difficult to think that Amy is okay with the fact that Jeremy killed her cousin, but it kind of just is what it is. I really do hope that they catch them someday, and maybe they'll slip up, but I'm also not going to hold my breath. A few years ago, I had started working at a bookstore that was across the street from a university. It was a cozy little place with a small study area and a cafe. Of course, most of the customers were students, as we sold a lot of the textbooks, as well as had rental options. The pay wasn't great, but hey, it was a perfect place to work because they worked with students' schedules. And at the time, I was going to the same university. The work was also simplistic. Other than ringing people up, we put away books that were returned or left out, processed the rentals, and just ultimately kept the store tidy. We also had magazine issues come in weekly, so we had to bring them in and store or stock them, whatever the manager said. When there was downtime, we were free to do what we wanted, as long as we didn't leave the register unattended and didn't disturb the other guests shopping or studying. I loved this time because I was a bookworm. If I wasn't finishing my homework, I was reading something. There were usually a few of us working there at one time, and most of them I even typically got along with. There was one manager that was pretty evil, but she didn't last long. Anyways, most of us got along fine, minus the occasional bickering about how someone organized books, or something petty like that. But the atmosphere changed a bit when we got a new employee. Most of the people that worked there were familiar with her from the school. I'll call her Sarah. To put this in the nicest way possible, Sarah was a bit strange. I never really saw her talking to anyone outside of a few instructors. She always took a bus or someone dropped her off, but she would promptly walk straight to the classroom without looking up from the ground. I don't know how she never managed to run into anyone either. When she got to class, she laid her desk out the same way. Textbook in the top right corner, notebook opened to an empty page, black pen, highlighter, and pencil all lined up perpendicular from her textbook. You could see her furiously writing throughout the class, but Anytime somebody walked by, she quickly covered it up with something. People did tease her, calling her aloof and odd, but I just kind of felt bad for her. I thought maybe she was an only child and didn't have a lot of friends or something. I wasn't one to make fun of people because I did have a younger brother with disabilities. But I was also too shy to approach her as well. So, when she started working there, I was the one that was chosen to train her. I thought perhaps this would be a good opportunity to get to know her. Her demeanor didn't change for the first few days. She was quiet and said very little, mostly just nodding and responding with, okay. She seemed to catch on to the filing system extremely fast without any questions, which was great, as I had a few people not understand it for a while. She seemed to prefer working alone though, so I tried not to bother her too much. It was probably a month or so into her working there that I finally got to talk to her a little bit, when she let me sit by her in the cafe for lunch. She agreed, but then I saw her quickly close up her backpack. I swear that I was probably pretty awkward in her opinion too, because I just sat there, not talking through most of my meal. Before I was going to leave, she actually spoke up and thanked me for helping her at work. I told her she didn't have to thank me, that I was glad to help her anytime, even outside of the store. She got quiet again, so I cleaned up and told her that I would see her later. She actually started talking to me a bit more while in the store. Usually small talk, but it was still better than nothing. Long story short, we ended up being the two people other than the manager, Jackie, to close on this one night. She chose to put back the last of the books while I filed the returns and closed out the register. She was also really quick about the filing, so when I finished everything except taking the money back to Jackie, I was surprised but thought that maybe she had seen a book that had caught her attention. I've been there before too, so I walked the bag back to Jackie and chatted with her for a few moments and then returned to the front, expecting to see her there waiting. Yet she still hadn't come back. So I figured I would go and help her, or at least make sure that she was okay. When I got there, she was facing away from me with a book on the ground, like it had fallen from her hand, and a cart almost still full. She was standing completely still, with her arms down to her side, but for some reason, I immediately felt like something was wrong. I called out her name, and when she didn't respond in any way, I started approaching her, slowly. I went around to be facing her, and this may sound mean, but her face terrified me. Her eyes were bulging, she was seeming to hold them so wide open, and her mouth was slightly hanging open too. The way that she was facing was just a wall, with a TV mounted on it, which had been turned off, and the lounge, so I couldn't imagine there being something over there causing this reaction from her. I then gently put my hand on her shoulder and said her name again, when her eyes shifted to look at me, and the only thing she said to me was, "I'm gonna die now." And she then collapsed to the floor and began convulsing. I'm incredibly thankful that I approached her, because I had to move the cart to get around her. If I hadn't, she would have busted her head on it on the way down. I freaked out. I didn't know what was happening at first, so I screamed for Jackie, and she quickly came running into the room. Thank God Jackie confirmed that she was having a seizure, so I quickly called 911 as she took care of her, laying her as you should when a person is seizing. Also, thankfully, they got there quick, as we did have a fire department close by. But by the time that they got there, she had stopped seizing but was completely unconscious. I don't know anything about her family, so I agreed to go to the hospital with them so that she wasn't alone. And Jackie said that she would contact the superintendents to get her family contact information. Thankfully, Sarah did make it out okay. She actually had a grandparent show up who thanked me for staying with her. She also told me that she suffered from seizures, but since she had started taking medication for them, they had become far and few in between. I told her it was no problem and left for the night. Let me tell you, it was not easy to sleep that night. All I could see was the look on her face, her telling me that she was going to die, and then collapsing over and over. Long story short, Sarah didn't work for the rest of that week, but she did come in and gave me a bag of chips. I always ate the same chips during lunch, and a thank you card attached to it that said, "Sorry I'm weird and scared you." I felt bad afterwards, but I did laugh when I read it. And then I immediately apologized to her, but she even smiled a bit. She explained to me that she can usually sense when she's about to have one, but what she does or says beforehand is never expected. And this was also why she didn't drive. But she said that she remembered feeling scared when it started because she couldn't recall what, if anything, she said, or what she looked like. But the look on my face was sheer terror. Then everything went black for her until she woke up in the hospital. I told her what she looked like, and then what she had said, and it actually made her laugh too. She again apologized and said that she has no idea why she would have said that. I learned a lot more about her after this, and we actually became good friends. But I still tease her about it to this day, and that face that she was making, it still haunts me. I used to work for a local donut shop that was staffed by, for the most part, 3 people. Myself, the owner's son, and then one other guy that I pretty much never saw because he only worked on days that I was off. The store was open at 5 a.m., and we either closed when we ran out of donuts, or we closed at 1 p.m., whichever came first. We typically ran out around 9 or 10 at the latest, so really, that was when we closed. It was a decent gig. It paid well, and while the short hours meant that I never really had a full check, I did get free donuts, and I didn't have to work a full day. Honestly, I was in my early 20s, so this was an ideal job for me, because I didn't really want to work full-time hours, and, well, I loved donuts. Enough about the shop, though. That's not the important stuff. What's important in this story is the employees. As I mentioned, it was myself most days, and when I was off, Jeff would take the same shift. However, the owner's son, Hunter, worked every day. All 7 days of the week he was there. The thing about Hunter was that he was obviously just there to get a paycheck, and he did not care about the business, even though it was literally owned by his parents. Every now and then when his mom or dad came into the store, he would actually do work, or at least pretend to, but the minute they left, he would be back to doing a whole lot of nothing. So, needless to say, he was getting paid more than me for more hours a week, and his idea of working was sweeping the back office for 5 minutes, and then sitting in the office chair for 4 hours on the computer. The worst part of this was that Hunter was also a pervy creep. While he was on the computer in the back, he would quite frequently watch adult-oriented content. At first, he was trying to be sneaky about it. He kept it muted, would click off of it quickly if I had to go to the back, but it was pretty obvious what he was doing. After a couple of months of this, though, he started getting more bold with it. He would leave it on while I was in the back and he knew that I was cleaning or prepping there and could see it. Then, after a while, he started playing it with the volume on. And, as expected, it started on low, but he quickly started playing it louder and louder, until it was on full volume. It got to the point that the customers could hear it, and that was where I drew the line. I was working the front, and a lady came in with her 2 kids. neither of which could have been older than 8 years old. She was asking me about the specifics of some of the donuts. I was explaining which fillings we had, and out of nowhere, the very obvious ambient sounds of two people enjoying each other's company came playing from the back room. She looked back with her eyes wide. Her two kids looked back laughing and asked what that was, and I could tell that I was beet red. I apologized profusely. I gave her all of her donuts for free and apologized a second time. The whole time I'm trying to get this transaction done, the noise is just playing from the back. As if he didn't know it was happening, or as if he didn't know it was that loud. As soon as the lady left, I grabbed the phone and I called his mother to tell her what he was doing. And, much to my surprise, she didn't really seem to care. Her solution was that I should go to the back and tell him to turn it down or ignore it. I told her that the customers could hear it, and that the last lady had kids that were subjected to the common adult content profanities and sounds. She laughed. She actually laughed when I said this, and said that she would have a talk with him, but until then, I needed to do my job and just ignore it. I was honestly shocked. The owners had always been decent people, and I had never been hit with this level of apathy from them. But it was also the first time that I had to report an issue involving their son. After I hung up, I decided that I would do what she said. I would go to the back and tell him to turn it down. I walked to the back and knocked on the door at first, just in case, but he didn't respond. I took a deep breath, and I braced myself for whatever I was going to see on the other side of that door. If I told you that I wished I hadn't done that, it would be the understatement of the century. I won't get into full detail, because it's honestly disgusting, but I have to explain a good amount of what was going on to highlight how messed up it was. I will say that it was creepy and disgusting, but I also know that some people will find humor in the whole thing. And that's okay, because I did laugh after the fact. When I opened the door, the first thing I saw was Hunter sitting in the chair, undressed as the day he was born. I had expected that he would possibly have his pants down, but I didn't expect him to be completely naked. After I noticed that he was naked, I noticed something else. And again, I won't put it into fully detailed words, but I will say that he was enjoying a donut, if you can put two and two together. He attempted to turn and cover himself and yell at me to get out, but it was honestly like a train wreck. I think that's the best way to explain him, though. Hunter was a train wreck. I think you would have to be to sink so low as to pleasure a donut at work with customers and a coworker in the other room. I immediately shut the door, took off my apron, tossed it on the counter, and I left. I was not dealing with him or with that situation anymore. I got to my car, grabbed my phone, and I called his mom again. She asked me what I needed, and I told her that her son was in the back office, naked, and then explained to her in very great detail what he was doing to the donut. I could tell by the fact that she didn't know what to say that she no longer thought it was funny. I wrapped up the call by telling her that I quit, and that this was officially her problem, not mine. After I hung up is when I literally burst out laughing. It was gross. It was really, really messed up, but also, how low do you have to sink to do that to a donut? Anyways, that's my story about when I worked at the donut shop. I will say that I never went back, and I asked them to mail me my last check, because I did not want to look at Hunter, and to have that image come back into my head. They closed the shop a couple of years later, mostly because they had a lot of bad press when Hunter decided to get drunk at work and then sexually harass several customers. Which tells me that he was pretty much on that downward trajectory for a while. There wasn't anything his mom could talk to him about that would fix his issues, and I'm pretty sure he caught a charge at one point. Hopefully. Anyways, I hope you found some humor in this truly disgusting tale, and I hope that Hunter and I never, ever meet again. So this was a collection of scary, creepy coworker stories. Definitely some terrifying stories here. The office relations ending badly. Definitely a messed up story. Hopefully they do catch those guys. I wish that they would have included some info for some news info or something, because I would like to look into it and see if anything ever happens, but they did not, and the information was changed, obviously. So it is unfortunate, but for their privacy's sake, I completely understand. I just would like to have followed that myself. And the girl with the seizures, that was terrifying. And then there's Hunter, Mr. Hunter and his donut. That story was gross, and I commend the person that submitted that for mentioning that they laughed, because as I read it, I laughed. I kind of saw where it was going, but at the same time, I laughed at the fact that yeah. Anyways, Hunter is down bad. Hopefully you all enjoyed the stories today. If you did, please do hit that thumbs up button. If you're new to the channel and liked what you heard, please consider subscribing. That would be greatly appreciated. Also, if you would feel so bold to do so, at the bottom of the video, somewhere down there, YouTube keeps moving things, there's a button for commenting. Leave me a comment. Have you ever had a creepy coworker? Anything like these at all? Because I haven't. Not like this. I've definitely worked with some weird people, but nothing to this extent, thankfully. So, if not, let me know what your plans are for the rest of the week. How's the weather where you're at? Because here it's actually kind of warm and rainy. Though today it looks sunny. It just looks sunny at the basement window right now. So, is what it is. It's December. I kind of would like some snow at some point. Yeah. There's also Patreon and channel memberships where you can get early access to stuff like this, if you so choose. Never expected, always appreciated. Blah, blah, blah. You know the spiel by now. So, all that said, friends, we are coming up at the end of the year, and I want to remind everybody there will be 2 compilations sometime between next week and the end of the year, which will be best of compilations. There will be a best of glitch of 2022 and a best of just scary stories in 2022. Both will be several hours long, so if you like compilations, those are coming up here pretty quick. I also have my Ask Me Anything coming up this weekend, so look forward to that. Yeah, I'm gonna stop talking. Remember, you are loved, you are valid, you are important, you're the best you that you can be. Never let anyone tell you otherwise. And my friends, until I see you again, much love and sleep well.